In the corner for the emergence of consciousness, we have David Long from the YouTube channel I Am David Long. In the corner for consciousness being fundamental, we have myself from Consciousness Matters. We're going to engage in a good faith conversation to explore. We're sorry to interrupt your usual programming, David Long, but the Consciousness Matters Agency has a mission for you from the Mission Is It Possible Bureau. As always, accepting the mission is entirely at your own discretion. Our operatives have become aware of your questionable debunk of Bernardo Kastrup, and we believe you could do a much better critique by explaining your objections to a steel man of Bernardo's position. The CMA will offer additional support at your discretion to help you do so and achieve your mission objectives. As always, on mission completion, your MEEP briefing will self-destruct, and the MEEP Bureau of the CMA will neither confirm nor deny your involvement in these activities. We will now restart your original broadcast in anticipation of mission completion, when this message will self-destruct. In the corner for the emergence of consciousness, we have David Long from the YouTube channel I Am David Long. In the corner for consciousness being fundamental, we have myself from Consciousness Matters. We're going to engage in a good faith conversation to explore each other's positions. Will we figure out the root cause of why we believe different things? Stay tuned and find out. Welcome to Consciousness Matters. Consciousness, emergent versus fundamental. If you want to get straight to us chatting about consciousness being emergent versus fundamental, use the timestamps in the description or advance yourself to 45 minutes and 45 seconds. Alternatively, if you believe context is king and you want to know as much as possible as to what brings us here today, then don't skip a thing. The choice is yours. First of all, I think that, for me, it's really quite exciting because I don't seem to find people that often who, and correct me if I'm wrong here, who sort of take an emergent sort of view on phenomenal consciousness. And I really want to make myself completely open to the way that you're seeing things, really completely steelman and understand your perspective, and let's see where we go.
Yeah, I'm definitely, I would consider myself to be a phenomenological emergentist. Yeah, to me that is like a relative fact as opposed to like a cosmological claim, like a big picture absolute truth claim, like about what the ultimate nature of the universe is, right? So I think that that's one particular place that I would maybe want to plant a flag, that I think that it's easier to know something about the emergence of something on Earth that we can start to maybe try to measure versus claims about what the ultimate nature of reality is. That's a little bit harder to make claims about. Also, I've been critical of people like Bernardo, which is why we're having this talk. And I would also like to potentially plant a flag in this idea that we don't want to create like a false equivalency. Like if I, let's say, suck at making a case for emergentism to people's liking or whatever, that is a separate thing from whether something like idealism stands on its own as a theory, right? So it can't just be like this versus that or something like that. And it's like if we destroy another person's view, then that means our view stands. This is kind of a move I feel like a lot of idealists are doing. Instead of making a case for their view, they just try to talk about and poke holes in materialism and be like, see, that's stupid. And then they act like their view is the natural alternative that's just a given or something like that. And I feel like any cosmological position needs to be reasonably established.
That's interesting. It's nice to hear you sort of describe it from your point of view as well. I appreciate that. So I feel like what you're asking me to do here is to accept that there isn't a dichotomy. There isn't a valid dichotomy that I mean, and this is just what I feel like you're saying, right? So I'm not trying to put words in your mouth or anything. I feel like what you're saying is that phenomenal consciousness, it can emerge, or it could have been here all along, or it could be something else, right? So it's not just one or the other. There isn't like two sides to a coin here. There's a third option. And I suppose what I'm trying to figure out is what that third option could be.
Right. Or even if there's not a third option, for either case to be said to be solid, it has to stand on its own feet. That knocking down the other position doesn't make your position stand, whoever may be doing that. You know what I mean? So if I want emergentism to be considered a valid theory, I have to do a good job to support that. And no amount of talking trash about idealism is going to get me there. And likewise,
Right. Okay.
you know, I can knock down idealism all day long and I can show potentially that it doesn't stand, right? And like, even if I suck at representing emergentism, I could still show that idealism doesn't stand, and vice versa, right? So it's like an idea has to stand on its own, basically, is what I'm saying.
I think I sort of see what you're saying, but I'm not sure I completely agree with that. I think I can see where you're coming from, and I think that were it not something that we could consider a dichotomy, you'd be absolutely right. So if it wasn't something where, you know, the light bulb can be on or off, then I think that if the case for it being off was really rubbish, then it is likely to be on. But if the case, do you see what I'm getting at here? So I think that the difference in our position at the moment is
there are multiple positions on this thing. It's not just idealism versus materialism. There's panpsychist. There's like
that's very
several
true,
different
right?
ways
So we've got
to be idealist or materialist, and so you know, if you want to establish what you think, what kind of materialist or idealist you are, you would have to make a valid case for that. Is all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know what? That's a very good point. So, when I talk about consciousness being fundamental or emergent, to me that seems like a valid dichotomy. However, consciousness being fundamental does not necessarily dictate idealism. We could have all sorts of flavors of panpsychism, right?
Right.
So that's where I would accept that we don't have a dichotomy. It's not materialism or idealism and nothing else. We've got other options to explore in the middle.
There's even
I also
stuff
realize
like
that
these like monists and stuff like this who think that somehow consciousness and matter are like the same thing, or I don't know. It seems like an incoherent position to me, but yeah. So there's a bunch of weird positions on this thing.
I feel like we've jumped right in at the deep end, and I feel like
True enough.
I should have said first. There's a lot of great stuff that I think is on your channel. There's a lot of stuff about integral theory. That would be really nice to sort of lead with a bit of that as well, so that sort of people watching sort of get an idea of what you're about and what you're doing on YouTube.
Sure. Yeah.
Because it's not all just Bernardo stuff.
No. In fact, I normally don't do Bernardo type stuff. Like I just did that because one of the dudes in my fan group was a fan of Bernardo. We have a lot of different people with different perspectives in there discussing different ideas. And so in the integral community, which is a philosophical community that I'm a part of, there's a couple main areas of friction and disagreement. One of them is around these topics of cosmology and ontology. And a lot of that is actually, interestingly enough, baked into fundamental aspects of our philosophy. For example, we talk about the quadrants as like one of our major philosophical tools. And this is like insides and outsides, or interiors and exteriors, and individuals and collectives. And so lots of our fundamental philosophy is done through taking into account these different aspects, and there's different methodologies that relate to these different aspects of reality. And so a lot of our philosophical arguments are about how these different quadrants or aspects of reality relate to each other. and which ones are and so like for example our main the main founding guy Ken Wilber, he comes from a more Eastern kind of background. He's more into like the Hindu Buddhist kind of Advaita Vedanta type of worldview, and so for him the quadrants tetra arise, or basically, all of these aspects of reality go all the way down and back. And for him, they're all arising in consciousness. So he's kind of, he's an idealist, like a Buddhist idealist kind of a way, where he talks about the ground of being and, how it's all I amness and it's all just, yeah. So like, the Buddhist stories around this kind of stuff. And so part of what we do as integralists is that our project is to put all the world's ideas on the table. And so it's like sort of the post deconstructionist reconstruction, basically, like understanding that all of these are just different relative human ways of wanting to talk about them and wanting to find the pros and cons or the truths and the values of all of them, right? And so, like, part of our project is to integrate the diversity of all these perspectives with discernment in a fair and overarching way with good standards, right? And so part of my criticism of him is that I feel like he's favoring particular ideas, at the expense of other ideas, and, that his Buddhist bias or his Eastern bias ends up corrupting the philosophy, when our project is to try and be fair and reasonable and skillful at integration, right? So this is part of the reason I come to this project, is because for me, when I look at the knowledge that we have in science and like the way that we can track the co-emergence of these quadrants, the way that interior functions correlate to exterior equipment and social situations and structures and environments, through time, like that we can actually, from what I can tell, see that consciousness is an emergent, and that it doesn't actually go all the way down and back. That to me, it doesn't make sense to say that, chemistry has some kind of inherent consciousness in it. And so for me, like, I don't think that the quadrants tetra arise, and so we have like a different kind of an emergentist version of integral that wants to grapple with this more idealist version of integral. And that's one of the major disagreements. But yeah, go ahead.
That sounds really interesting. So you've got these quadrants, but the interior quadrant is absent for, say, the beginning part of the universe, and then the interior quadrant sort of appears.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing that I would sort of just like to ask about that is that it's this sort of idea of reconstruction and discernment and integration. It sounds great, but how do you balance pluralism with the disagreements that come out of that integration? I mean, how tight does that integration have to be? Do you work with people who do take the idealist position, and is there a pluralism within that effort to integrate? Or do people want to integrate a little bit more tightly than that?
Well, there is, this is one of those things in the community where there are people who have tighter standards and there are people who have more loose standards, And I think that we're right now, especially, we're kind of grappling with this as a community, especially as Ken Wilber gets a little bit older, and we know that he's going to be gone soon, and it's going to be left to the rest of us, and there's no kind of structure in place that allows for some kind of a refinement process. So you have people like the people at the integral stage who talk about the integral diaspora, and this idea of all of these different integralists and their projects, and they do work to have them on, and a lot of times the stuff is like maybe not that up to standard. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's great stuff, but sometimes not. And then there are other people who, are trying to maybe establish a more like rigorous method of reintegrating and refining the map together through some kind of a process of really like establishing some kind of method to get to test ideas in kind of this open refinement, kind of Western Enlightenment sort of way, And it's the emergentist camp who wants to do this kind of stuff for the most part. The more idealist camp are like generally the more orthodox Ken Wilber types, and a lot of them kind of lean in the more I would say like almost like a culty kind of direction, where it's like he got it right. He's the Einstein of consciousness, said and done. Like, let's just move on and say that it's good. And to me, he's more like the Freud of this thing, you know, like groundbreaking guy, brings tons to the table, kind of gets some stuff wrong, but hey, he births a whole new, you know, way of talking about things and a whole new, you know, style and method, and we should give him the respect that he's due, but also, you know, not act like it's said and done. So.
So, I mean, it sounds like you're in a position where you've been exposed, potentially at least, to some really interesting arguments between the emergent point of view and the sort of more some aspects of consciousness as fundamental point of view. So, I mean, you must have had a very interesting seat to this sort of discussion.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of different perspectives on it, and it's an interesting topic. For me, like, I'm actually more interested in the project of the skillful integration of religion and like what a good spiritual practice is like when we actually take into account multiple religious traditions and see what they all have to teach us, like different human experiments and something like that. But, you know, as part of it is like you have to deal with basically these mythologies that people take seriously and the ideas around that, and like still kind of having work to do to deconstruct some of that stuff so we can really integrate on the other side, right? Like part of what happens when you start with this reintegration is that it's messy, right? Like you said, it is hard. People tend to come from a perspective, and so they do favor particular ideas, and so almost everyone's integration kind of starts out a little bit biased, and then over time you kind of have to wring some of that stuff out and really, you know, like you say, through taking into account lots of different other worldviews and really grappling with them in an honest kind of way, then you start to kind of be like, well, maybe I don't actually have the best view on this. Maybe it's actually something like this other thing.
It sounds great. Well, I'm hoping, I mean, I don't want to just sort of jump right into it now. I'd actually like to hear a little bit more about how you got into what you're doing at the moment and what sort of led you to it. But I'm hoping that we can sort of work towards having an interesting chat about perhaps why I believe that the more fundamental is correct and why you believe that the more emergent is correct. I think there could be a really interesting coming together there. So what got you into all of this? I mean, I see that, has your YouTube channel been around for about 6 years now? Something like that?
Maybe something like that. I think what really got me into making the YouTube videos was because, unfortunately, a lot of the way that, like I was saying, Ken Wilber and company, like they kind of keep a lot of their ideas behind a paywall. So, unfortunately, instead of seeing integral philosophy as like how I kind of see it, like this important kind of thing that could be a philosophical movement to help the world, when they were first coming out with some of that kind of stuff, they were like, okay, well, how are we going to get paid to be able to do this? How is this a viable thing, right? Like, and so as much as I don't like it, I can understand why, you know, they would be coming from that perspective. And so they've sort of become like a self-helpy type thing, you know, where it's like, we'll help you to be the most integrated person. And it's become very like personal focused, right? Like what we would say is like a lot focused on the upper individual quadrants, but not so focused on the communal and systemic quadrants. And now that we're starting to maybe get a little bit more established, I'm hoping that we can do more work to create more of like a movement and like create new opportunities in terms of like the kind of systems that we can build. Because actually, I feel really excited about this because we have integral governance systems where we have methods to be able to create, you know, to come to actual actionable conclusions and solutions through governance practices that are not top-down might makes right. like the normal, like, legislation of taste, top down, or like bottom up mob rule, like whatever is most popular, like, so like I feel like the world actually kind of needs integral perspectives in the actual realm of social and political ideas, not just as these intellectual elites off in their castles discussing ideas in a masturbatory way forever, which is a little bit the problem with integral these days. But I'm a very practical philosopher. I'm interested in how this stuff actually touches the ground and the real consequences of ideas and stuff like this.
Gotcha. So, I mean, even before the YouTube channel, though, what got you into integral philosophy in the first place?
Well, before I came across integral philosophy, I was really interested in philosophy, and I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell. And so I think what happens is that a lot of people kind of naturally start to gravitate towards some kind of meta perspectival integration, some kind of big picture meta-systemic mind map. We start to figure out our own versions of that kind of stuff. And there for a while, I was really excited as a philosopher. I thought that, like, I thought I was on this next level and I had my own kind of thing. And then I came across integral theory and I was like, oh, okay, well, I think this is a little better than what I'm doing. I like how it's more like rationally grounded. Mine was a little more poetic, more like archetypal, and like I almost thought of it more as like a modern mystery school or something like this for 20-somethings who need some kind of guidance to try to make it like fun and cool, to like give them some yeah. So I mean, like, I went through my own existential crisis and awakening. I was raised really religious. My dad was kind of a con man, and so I had these deep, profound questions about truth and goodness and the relationship between the two. And I was really lucky. I came across a dude who was a lot further along the path than me at a particular point. When when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, kind of a thing. And I learned a lot from him, and he really got me excited about how fun and cool philosophy is. Like, a lot of people don't realize this, but like philosophy to me is fun and cool. It's not nerdy, and it's totally practical.
I'll second that.
It's not like about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. Like, it's about how we live our lives every day. Like, to me, philosophy is very practical. How we live our life, the decisions that we make, these kinds of things are our philosophy. And it's like we're either conscious of it and like living intentionally and living an awake and consciously aware life, or we're just doing like post hoc justifications for whatever we decided to do. And like, that's basically living an unconscious and immoral, irresponsible life, right? So to me, engaging in philosophy and being active in your own philosophy and self-mastery is a part of human responsibility. Yeah, so I wish more people would take it more seriously instead of acting like it's some fringe discipline or something.
I guess it's one of those things where you can sort of it's an exercise of leading horses to water, right?
Right. So that's what I try to do on my YouTube, is just try to make it cool and fun and not stuffy and boring. I try to make it playful and interesting and creative, and as well as hopefully insightful and inspiring and useful.
Well, I've definitely found some of your content that I really like. So yeah,
Word.
I think you've definitely succeeded in some of that. Definitely.
Likewise. Well, I appreciate the aesthetic of your channel, man. Like, a lot of philosophy is not aesthetically... It doesn't even seem like people have an aesthetic consideration when they're making their things. And I appreciate the fact that you have put thought into this stuff. So, respect.
Oh, thank you very much. A couple of things I'd just like to touch on from what you're saying there. So I think that not everyone is going to know who Joseph Campbell is. So I'd really, I'd love to invite you to just sort of tell me a bit more about Joseph Campbell for anyone who doesn't know. And also, I'd like to, just before we do that, I'd like to sort of share with you, just very briefly, my religious upbringing was just so relaxed. it was so chilled out. It was I was raised Christian, and I heard these sort of stories. Never had to really read very much of the Bible. When I did, I was sort of like, oh, what's going on there? It just seemed a bit odd in places, right? But I talked to my mum, and she's like, oh, well, being a Christian is just being a nice person. And I'm like, I like to think that I'm a nice person. Oh, I guess that makes me a Christian, So I sort of fell away from that when I was sort of doing science and religious studies at school, and just sort of became an agnostic. Some time later than that, quite a lot of time later than that, I went through my own sort of, I suppose it would sort of, you'd call it that sort of awakening experience where you really start to focus in on what it is to be a conscious creature and what that means to you, right? And what you do with that, and maybe what your responsibilities are as well. And I went down a very different rabbit hole than yourself in a sense, but even after going through that trip, even though I hadn't really seen very much of the integral stuff, it still seems quite interesting to me when I've stumbled upon it. So I was wondering, because not everyone really knows what it's like to go through a really religious upbringing and sort of what that might be like for you. So if you feel free to share anything that you like about that. So Joseph Campbell and that would be great.
Yeah, well, for me, my parents were like pretty serious about it, and I was around a lot of other people that were very serious about it. And I would say I've read the Bible at least six times straight through. That's like not counting like the stuff at church. Like, I know more about Christianity than I know about anything.
Wow. Right. Okay.
So like,
you're going to know a lot more about it than I will.
Yeah. So like, I took it really seriously for a long time. And I think, because I had problems at home, I stuck with it extra long because it was like, for me, a place to go to actually like find a home and like some safe place. Like, in fact, a lot of people talk about religion and stuff like that as like a crutch or a security blanket. Well, that's actually valid sometimes. Sometimes people do need a crutch or a security blanket. And, some people might say that the church also takes advantage of vulnerable people who are in a bad space. That's true, but there's also good people in there who really do care, and they really can be like a loving community for people. So, this is also why I'm concerned with this project of religion and spirituality and wanting to create healthy versions of these things, right? Because I don't think that we can just take them away and act like religion doesn't serve important functions in society, right? Like, we haven't had a healthy and mature form of government, but we also don't act like government isn't a project worth doing, right? So I think that's an important thing to say about religion. So I understand from the inside the value and the importance of religion. I understand the functions of what it's doing and how it can be helpful to people. Just like the fact that you can do this ceremony and decide, I want to change my life. I want to start over. I want to be forgiven. And I want to rededicate myself to being a good person. And I want to do that right now. Like, the fact that they have a method to do that and to allow for something like that, we need that. Right. We need that. Mm-hmm. So
yeah.
There are things like this in religion that are super important, and they deserve to be looked at honestly and seriously, and not have the baby thrown out with the bathwater, even if it turns out the religion itself and the mythology and all that kind of stuff isn't literally true. So
Right.
I grew up in this stuff, and like I was told like this stuff is literally true, and like it was like a kind of before the internet. Like I'm 38. I'm gonna be 39 this year. So when I was a kid, there was this guy my dad used to play on tape, like Ron Wyatt. He was like this like wannabe Indiana Jones of Christianity archaeology, who like supposedly discovered Noah's Ark and the Ark of the Covenant and all this kind of stuff. So like when I was a little kid, I thought that we had like legit proof of this stuff. Like I wasn't just like,
Right.
oh, I believe it based on faith. I was like, no, like look around. Like there's evidence for this stuff. There's archaeological evidence, there's geological evidence. I'm thinking that there's a good case for this stuff. So like when I got a little bit older, I learned more about my tradition, and it basically kind of crumbled in my hands. Most Christians have never even heard about the Ebionites, the Marcionites, the Gnostics, the apocalypticists, the proto-Orthodox. They have no idea about pre-Orthodox Christianity. Right? Orthodox
Right.
Christianity is basically the version that we have now, which is just like a clusterfuck mishmash of these other different views that existed before that. I hope you don't mind. You can bleep me or whatever if you want to. But like, it's like this the Romans, the people who used to throw Christians to the lions, decided we want to unite our kingdom under a worldview, be it pagan or Christian, and so they basically mashed a lot of it together and came up with the dogmatic orthodoxy, and it's from there that we get all of Christianity as we know it, and we don't even have like a solid canon until like 500 500 AD or something like that. But yeah, like when you actually research the roots of this stuff, you see that there really isn't even any good evidence for Jesus as a historical person. And the different stories that we get are like messed with by the scribes and like changed. Stuff gets inserted in there. Like, and all of that is like written way later by people who were never there and didn't, never met Jesus and didn't experience. Like, so it's like when you really, really start to dig into the stuff, it kind of like, if you really want to take it seriously as a literal historical fact, like it doesn't stand. So I kind of went through a period of like, somewhat of an existential crisis / awakening around this kind of stuff. Like, especially because I was a little bit older. Like I was like 17 or 18 by the time I was getting rid of this stuff. So I felt like I had a lot of catching up to do. And so that's why I really
Right.
like dug in deep to like want to know what's up with philosophy and like to try to figure out different worldviews. And I basically studied everything I could to try to figure out what was going on. And also, because I had been indoctrinated so deep into a worldview and it took me so long to deconstruct it and get out, I wasn't about to just get stuck in another, limited worldview again. So I was
Right.
very careful with rigorous standards in criticism of this stuff. And there for a while, I went to a very antithetical position where I was like, kind of more hard atheist or hard agnostic, as most of us do,
Right.
And I was like, religion is the worst thing that has ever happened to humanity. Can you believe this terrible travesty that people have been put through, like brainwashed into these cults from birth? It's like, it's child abuse, like all this kind of stuff. It's a mental virus, all this, and there's something right about that. There's, I'm not going to say it's totally wrong, but then I said this in front of my good friend's mom, and she gave me some Joseph Campbell. And eventually
Okay.
I watched some of that, and I was in a very susceptible place at the moment, and I was like, my mind was blown. I was like, actually, all this stuff that I was taught isn't just bullshit. It isn't just a waste of time. There is deep metaphor and coded language in this stuff, and this poetry and these archetypes and this symbolism is actually way deeper than scientific facts, way more meaningful to my life than any description of the isness of things. You know, these are deep poetic metaphors about what it is to live a human life, and the struggles that we go through, and how we can orient ourselves in relationship to the world and each other. So it really brought me back around, and that's when I think Joseph Campbell really showed me, like through demonstration, what an integral perspective is, how to integrate diversity with discernment, how to have a skillful overarching methodology that is not favoring any one particular symbol set. And so when I had that and I came to integral, and I saw that Wilber was doing a really good job in his meta map, but he was favoring a particular religious project, that's where I started to have some kind of issues.
I think that maybe people have also found Jordan B. Peterson to be sort of similar in that way of sort of reviving the metaphor and sort of digging into the value in the stories. And I know that we've had a quick exchange sort of on Facebook Messenger regarding sort of the difference between sort of, say, Jordan Peterson and Joseph Campbell. But I'd love to share that with everyone, right? So what's your difference?
I think Jordan Peterson is a very poor man's Joseph Campbell. I compared him when we were talking to, like, I think I said Joseph Campbell is like the Beatles and Jordan Peterson is like the Monkees.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know the Monkees, they're like a highly produced, quickly thrown together American ripoff of the Beatles, as a way to try and market and get. So, like, Jordan Peterson, he's basically like, he's standing on the shoulders of these giants like Young and Campbell, but he's bringing nothing new to the table. In fact, he's not even really up to their level, because he's also favoring a particular religious tradition. You know, he favors Christianity and thinks, well, maybe Christianity has some truth to it. The rest of the time I'll speak about the stuff poetically, but maybe Jesus, you guys. And then you got to wonder about his honesty too, right? Because a lot of his fans are Christian. So is he doing that because he doesn't have consistent standards? Or does he double not have consistent standards because he's not being honest with his speech? Because he's trying to keep his money and stuff like that. So I don't know.
To offer you a respectful counterpoint, if I may. Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's interesting, right? I think that I've seen him talk with Sam Harris, and I know that he doesn't make a big deal out of these things applying to more than Christianity, but I'm sure I remember in my mind that sort of Sam's tried to sort of tackle this with him on stage at some point, and he's said, you know what, Sam, you're right. This doesn't just apply to Christianity, and I'm wondering how much it's reasonable to sort of not be too harsh with him if his sort of like the audience that he's addressing are mostly Christian. Talking in mostly Christian ways is the easiest way to connect with them without alienating anyone. So I think perhaps it's a strategy not for telling everyone everything, but perhaps making a step in the direction that he wants to go in.
Yeah, I definitely think that there are a lot of, maybe everyone, from a developmental perspective, they're kind of just a bridge from one idea to the next, and maybe they're not the ultimate thing in themselves, bringing you the ultimate philosophy, but they're kind of useful for a particular group of people to a particular end. Like, I think Peterson is a good voice, especially for young, conservative, right-leaning young men to, like, let's be responsible, let's have integrity, stuff like this, like some kind of an attempt at healthy masculinity. I think he goes a little bit toxic sometimes, but he's trying.
Well, I think just the conversation that we've had is quite interesting, because I think that if there are people out there at the moment who know Jordan Peterson, then hopefully they may get a little bit curious and go, well, they don't have to agree with us. Maybe they just want to go and check out Joseph Campbell and see how he compares, right?
Totally. Yeah, go
nothing
see for yourself.
Nothing to lose.
I think the best way to check out Joseph Campbell is to check out The Power of Myth. It was on Netflix for a minute, but it's not anymore. But yeah,
okay.
The Power of Myth. If you can get this, it's a lecture series, or not a lecture series. It's a conversation series between him and Bill Moyers, and he basically.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah. He basically goes through, and that's what my friend's mom gave me, and it had a big impact on me. Joseph Campbell is a highly respected figure. When you mention Joseph Campbell and people know Joseph Campbell, I've never heard anybody say anything bad about Joseph Campbell. I don't know. Joseph Campbell is highly respected.
No one wants to cancel Joseph Campbell.
No
right?
one wants to cancel Joseph Campbell, and whoever it is, they can. Okay. I will defend him to the death. They can come see me.
Well, I tell you what, I'm definitely going to check out Power of Myth. I'm definitely going to check out that lecture series.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah. That's like a 6-part series. Each one's an hour. And then he has a more in-depth one called Mythos, which I think is 8 or 10 parts. And that one is more lecture series. And that is awesome. Honestly, I think people should put away whatever you're studying. Go just bathe in that for a while. Honestly, you could watch that thing 10 times and still get more good stuff out of it.
Excellent.
Yeah. That poetry is deep, man. When you really learn the poetry of archetypal symbolism, we are literally playing out archetypes and ideas in the world. Everything, almost the whole world becomes a poetic mythological stage in a way. When you really can get the deep poetry of this stuff, it is powerful and life changing. It's not just a guy who has a cool theory about some idea,
Yeah, that's interesting, right? I'd have to think about that one a lot. I'd also have to see the series, I think.
Yeah, I think
maybe it's something that we could revisit.
I think there are some people who are the man or the expert in their particular field. And it's if you can find this person who is the best one to learn from in that area, you can really get the most out of your study time. I feel like
I've been trying to find this person for consciousness. I've been trying to find this person for just the essence of the mystery of consciousness.
Wish there was somebody I could point to and be they're the man. They know what's going on. I don't know that person. But
I find that what I have to do is take a sort of pluralist approach. I find that I have to be able to keep quite a few plates spinning at the same time and just try and really dwell on that, really, and just see what sense that I can make of that. And I've been doing my best for several years, and I feel like I've got somewhere. But I'd really like to get stuck in now to the whole sort of is consciousness fundamental or emergent thing. But I also, if there's anything else you want to chat about, if there's anything else you want to go into depth on, I'd be happy to do that first.
No, I'm good with that. I think this is a kind of a good segue, because it sort of seems like one of the things that you've been trying to do, and one of the reasons I was kind of excited to talk to you about this kind of stuff is because it seems like you've actually been trying to study multiple theories around this kind of stuff. You're not just I got my champion, it's all good, I'm done. You wanna consider.
Don't need to think about anything else now. It's all done. Yeah,
all done.
Hope that doesn't get clipped. No, exactly, right? I mean, it's about being open-minded to new possibilities, right?
Yeah. And, when I made this Bernardo video, I feel like after making that video, I learned a lot about how computers work.
Right.
Through studying this stuff, I'm still learning stuff all the time, is my point. Even when I'm getting criticized, like I'm thinking about that stuff, and then I'm going home and I'm like, like processing it and trying to come up with stuff on the other side of it. Like, even if I feel like the other person didn't even do a good job of criticizing me, right? It's like,
Right.
I'm like, well, okay, well, what kind of new perspective? How does this refine my perspective? How can I figure out how to communicate this better on the other side? So I mean, I think people
I'm
like
seeing
us
that, by the
are
way.
just growth minded. Well, thank you, respect.
If we were really dug into our positions, I don't think our conversation would be going quite so well at this point. If we were having one at all,
You're
so,
wrong.
Yeah, I appreciate this. I do, and likewise, I'm really quite excited about this because I think that I've honestly found very little to challenge my point of view so far, and I have tried. I'm part way through listening to Daniel Dennett's Consciousness Explained at the moment. So, and I've had different sorts of takes from different sorts of people on all the sorts of things that are going on. Who goes first? I mean, would you like to tell me what makes you think it's emergent, or would you like me to start by saying what makes me think it's fundamental?
Well, if I was gonna build a ground up case for emergentism, which I'm actually working on, I have a little pickup part I need to do, and it's on a green screen. I just need to make the time. Oh man, I'm overwhelmed with videos. So when I put out this case for emergentism, I start with consciousness as the epistemic primary. And maybe that's a good place for us to plant a flag, right? Maybe we would both agree that the first thing that we can know is our own consciousness, that we're having an experience. That's probably that's like the ground of epistemology. Like that's the first thing that we can know. So then I would want to, conquer these problems of like trying to figure other stuff out, right? So the next thing that I would want to grapple with would be this problem of other minds, right? And the way that I would say that I think that there are other minds is because I didn't come up with language, and that there are cultures and stuff that I don't know. I don't feel like I'm just remembering this stuff and it's technically all in my mind or something. No, I had to learn stuff that I didn't know. So to me, that's a good logical indicator, let's say, that there are other minds, other beings out there. I think we can start with the logical inference of other minds, and then we can come back later and we can prove it more with science. So the next thing is that, okay, well, I exist, other people exist, so we exist in a shared context of some kind, right? So that would be my next. Now, that from there, we're not saying that it's not idealism or that it's emergentism or that it's realism.
We're being agnostic about it right now. Shared
right
context.
Now,
that's all we know.
We know that there's some shared context in which we exist.
Right.
And so then I think from there we try to figure out some things about that shared context. Right, and we would start with some of these, let's say, axioms or fundamental assumptions, like we exist in a shared reality that's consistent, that works in a particular way, right? And so this is like the origins of the foundations of how we do science.
Right.
I tested this thing, and I came to this conclusion. You look at it. You see when you do it, you come to this conclusion. And if anybody who does this test can come to the same conclusion, that says something about the nature of reality and how it works.
Yeah.
Like the fact that we've gotten to this place where we can consistently and reliably build computers and cell phones and put a man on the moon, that says something about the nature of reality, how it works, and our mastery over being able to understand how it's going to work consistently.
Yes, I completely agree with you there. Yeah.
Okay, so these are the building blocks, right? Then I would say, now that we've established science has its best theories and its best explanations of events, let's say. So you get not just facts, but explanatory power around those facts. And a community of the adequate who will begin to interpret those facts in relation to each other. And there's this open, transparent process, which, I mean, of course, is not perfect by any means. There's not enough peer review around a lot of stuff, and we definitely have issues. But the idea being, given a long enough time scale, given this kind of process, we'll be able to refine and come in at something reliable, especially over time. So then I would argue that evolution is a fact that, or like a valid theory that scientists are saying is a fact. There's a little bit of
I'm
there's a little bit of
if I
confusion
can offer
around
just
the
a little
language
bit
there.
of
Sure.
So I would say that, I mean, that the mystery in my mind with regards to evolution is, can we say that it's not to say that evolution isn't happening at all, it's to say how is it happening? Is subjectivity, is consciousness, or wherever it's coming from, playing a role in steering things, right? So that's my particular take on it, which I suppose, if you really wanted to be brutal about it, you could say is sort of an intelligent design perspective. Depends on how you'd categorize it, but I think that just to steel man my case a bit, the whole idea of sexual selection is, you could argue, is a conscious choice. So there's definitely, it's not like it's completely absent from the picture, but I suppose it sort of begs the question of me, is it sort of how spooky do I think it gets? And I think that's where it gets really, really interesting. But I don't want to, I'm ready to talk about this, but I do want you to finish off any thoughts that you've got in your head. I don't want to,
Well, okay. I think I'll briefly just finish up with this, the steps that I would think that would get us there, and then I'll say something about my position on free will and determinism really briefly, because you're
fantastic.
Because you're kind of bringing that up.
Brilliant.
So I think evolution is one of these well-established scientific theories. I think that scientists have done extra work to get out there. In reaction to religious fundamentalist creationists getting out and wanting to put their equal emphasis in the textbooks in schools and stuff like this, they've been getting out there and being no, evolution is a fact. You don't have a fact, you have an assertion. We will not be teaching this in science class, right? And I think that we would see something similar about emergentism if scientists felt threatened by Buddhist fundamentalists who wanted equal representation in textbooks. We would see scientists getting out and being like, no, emergentism is the other side of the coin of evolution, which is a fact, and no, we are not going to be teaching creationism in science class. I think that one of the main problems with people who, when they talk about the hard problem, is they act, let's say in integral language, they act as if only the upper quadrants are factors at play, and as if that we should be able to explain consciousness by talking about stuff. I think that's not a good case, and we can get into that more deeper, the hard problem and stuff, especially since you're checking out some Daniel Dennett. He's one of the only people that I've seen even kind of beginning to sort of talk about the problems with the hard problem in a way I would kind of agree with. But on the free will determinism thing, real quick, I talk about, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but I have a video called Semantic Compatibilism. I have a friend who I do an integral review podcast with, and he is actually writing a book about free will and determinism. And he likes to call it semantic incompatibilism, and I'll explain why, right? Because being a compatibilist means that you take some kind of a middle position between free will and determinism. where you're not fully going to be on board with either one, and you kind of want to come up with some kind of a compromise. That's what compatibilism means. But the reason that he wants to call it semantic incompatibilism is because the type of compatibilism I'm talking about is that there's a problem with the semantics. Like, I think third-person descriptions of reality don't have any room for a subject in them. It's all just billiard balls. So science just describes things describes things happening. This caused this, caused this, caused this. And that's true. Because whatever thing that you would want to do, there's probably a reason for why you would want to do that. a pre-given reason. Maybe not determined or like, like fated, destined or something like that. But then the way that we talk about our experience in first and second person terms is like, I wanted to go to the store. You want to come with me? You know what I mean? We don't go, my refrigerator is empty and my stomach is hungry, therefore we must go to the store. Or something like this.
And it's still got the possessive language in there as well. My stomach, the things that belong to me.
Right.
It's all tangled up in the eye, isn't it?
Yeah. So there's a problem, I think, even in talking about these things, just built into the semantics of it. So it's like, on one hand, we want to say that our first and second person perspective is true, and it is true. Like, it is authentically true that I want to go to the store. But it is also true that this and this and this and this and this, is the reason why you want to go to the store.
My mind now playfully wants to create a story that doesn't involve the first or the second person. It's sort of like the group of atoms that identified as Ian decided they were going.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think this is a problem in philosophy in general is like, on one hand, a lot of people want to be really reasonable and talk about determinism because it seems like it makes good sense. How could you refute that? Everything has a reason. On the other hand, we want to talk about morality and say that you should choose to be good. So,
choice. Yes, choice. How do we do choice?
So yeah, and I think, again, this is why you can't just reduce everything to the upper quadrants. There's also the lower left intersubjective relative field of value and meaning. And this gets us kind of back to Joseph Campbell. Like, we can talk about the facts of the matter all day long, but we are storytellers, and we are stuck in a story. We're telling stories to each other, and even that really factual story is just a really rigorous and well-qualified story. So we need to tell good stories that work to achieve the practical goals that we're trying to accomplish as humans. And to some extent, the truth is a necessary but not sufficient to that end. Like, for example, we need to know what's true in order to be good, right? Because we're good for what is true. We're good for the way things actually are. We're trying to be good for what is. And the reason when people are trying to be good and end up not being good is often because they're out of touch with reality as it actually is. They're trying to be good, but they don't understand the situation well enough to actually be good for it for how it is. But then on the other hand, it actually matters more that we're good than it is that we are perfectly accurate in our descriptions of the truth of things. Like, the goal is the good, and the truth is, like I'm saying, like maybe a necessary but not sufficient to achieve that end. So this is, I think, where integral theory can be really interesting. Like, on the other side of deconstructing that idea of the tetra arising of the quadrants, I came up with this idea called nested quadratic holarchies, which are basically different reprioritizing of the nesting of those quadrants within each other in relation to different philosophical projects, right? So, for example, I'm saying that when it comes to epistemology, the upper left quadrant is primary, or personal interiority is primary. We have to start with that.
Okay.
And I would say in terms of morality, the lower left quadrant, or like the greater good, is primary. And everything else, all the other quadrants are subservient to that. And I would say when it comes to ontology or cosmology, that as an emergentist, I think the upper right quadrant is primary, right? So it's like the quadrants relate to each other differently depending on what the project is. And
so when you say upper right, we're talking about an objective view there, the exterior rather than the interior view, yeah?
A single, like you would say, the universe is a thing, E equals mc squared. So energy, something like that. Like there's a primary fundamental thingness to the universe or something like that. Yeah, it's like it's technically like a realism or materialism or something like this. Although the reason that emergentist integralists will usually avoid saying that they're materialists is because usually integralists will speak in derogatory terms about reductionist materialism, and it's more considered to be like what we would call like a modern rational reductionism, where they want to say the only things that exist are things that you can grasp in your hands, like only stuff exists, as if like that's what we call like exterior reductionism. So as an integralist, I include all these different factors. I'm not trying to say that consciousness isn't real, or something like this, or that values aren't real, that love isn't real. Of course, all that stuff is real. Yeah, so
that's great.
That would be an important distinction. Yeah. So this is also why I was saying that there's not just one type of materialism or one type of idealism, right? Because I would argue with that materialist and tell him that his position was foolish and reductionist, and that even his one way of talking about things is limited. I spoke to this one guy once, and he wanted to say everything is physics, and I'm just like,
yep, yeah.
I'm like,
I know that approach.
Yeah, I'm like, you know what? Everything is music. How about that? He's like, psh, music. He's like, music can't, is a human discipline. I'm like, dude, talking about physics is a human discipline. He's like, music doesn't go all the way back to the Big Bang. I'm like, oh, you mean that massive, creative, percussive event? I'm like, I can totally talk about the whole world in the language of music,
Right.
Which isn't to say that I would want to reduce it to that, but just because you can talk about everything in one kind of poetic symbol set doesn't mean that that's the only truth.
I don't know, man. If you tell everybody that everything's made out of vibrations, I'm sure you'll get some New Age followers.
True. I mean,
I'm just trying to be playful here.
I know, and there's validity to their perspectives, and like a lot of their metaphors make a lot of sense in the context of what they're doing, like if they're doing energy work with someone, like if you're doing massage or something like that, like you're putting your energy into them, like that, like a lot of that language kind of makes more sense in certain contexts than others, so.
Sure. Where shall we pick up from here? I've got evolution versus creationism. That's the thing that I've noted down. Other minds. I had to learn stuff I didn't know. Yeah, no, it's right. I think I just want to touch on that point of evolution versus creationism. Well, the thing that really rubs me up the wrong way about that as a dichotomy. I'm not blaming you in the slightest. I see this, this sort of
Sure.
these two things as opposing forces. Is I never quite got my head around why there isn't more of an effort to integrate these two ideas and explore the middle ground a little bit more. Because I think that's where it gets interesting for me. I think evolution is a cracking way of looking at the world. Have we been able to test that it works with random chance? Is something else required? I mean, as it is, it's great. But yeah, it's just...
Well, this is actually where I'm agreeing with you.
Sort of,
I'm thinking the language is too reductionist around these kinds of things. And then we end up trying to reduce everything to one particular way of talking about things, which is limited. And that's problematic because it doesn't really feel right and resonate with everybody, right? So it's like we're stuck with these different limited language games to be able to try and explain and describe our experience, and people are over here like, well, no, this is true language, and the other people are like, no, this is true, you know what I mean? And it's like, because they're not compatible, we can't make any kind of progress with them. And if we continue just to act like they're both the one true way, then we get stuck at this bypass where it's either one or the other. Now, at the end of the day, our symbolism has to cash out. You know, we can't just you tell stories that aren't true. You know, like we want to, or we right. can, but that's not our project.
No. Yeah, right. So all the science I learnt is all symbolism still. It's all metaphor. It's just, it's sort of true, right? I mean, I get told about atoms and neutrons, but then I learned that like a neutron isn't actually just a whole thing. You know, it's got quarks and gluons in it. And I'm like, oh, right, okay. But I'm operating with sort of like these symbols, and I understand what these symbols will do when they interact with each other. And that's sort of the basis of the knowledge that I have about science. So I know exactly what you mean about sort of having a story, but also it's sort of cashing out to be true, right? At least I feel I do.
Yeah.
I must admit, I'm extremely partial to reductionism myself. I love to reduce things as much as I can. Not in a way of sort of saying this is the absolute way that we have to do things all the time, but I just enjoy it as an exercise, you know. So I'm happy to consider other things at the same time, but it always feels like it works for me for some reason.
I think reductionism is one of the main things that integralists are often trying to avoid, right? Is like that's kind of part of our project, is to try and take like a holistic view and to realize the potential strengths and limits of any perspective, right? So it's like in certain contexts, I could see why, you know, like it would just be reasonable to, okay, well, today we're going to talk about life as music and take that reductionist view for a practical purpose or something like that. So it's not to say that you always have to have everything, because that's kind of impossible, right? But yeah, like we try not, like that's one of the things that we try to avoid. It's like almost like an insult in the community. Well, that's a very partial and reductionist approach or view on that topic.
Right.
You know, it's like you're not really including all these factors, you know, and part of what we want to do is make sure that we're including everybody has a place at the table, at least. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that some people won't be considered, you know, to be getting a lot of things wrong or whatever. And I guess it's not even just as much as it is about including people as much as it is including perspectives or all the important factors, right? So it's like integral theory has 5 main lenses, which are the quadrants. That's more the philosophy stuff. And then the other factors are levels, lines, states, and types. That's more like psychology stuff. And the idea is that you want to kind of run through these factors like a checklist to get like a holistic perspective on the thing. Because what a lot of people do is they go, oh, you're ISFP or something like that. So that's why you come to this conclusion or whatever. You know what I mean? They have that one tool.
I'm going to analyze everything by the Brigg-Myers personality test. Is that it?
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah. They have that one tool, and then they try to fit everything into that. It's like, oh, what's your sign? Yeah. As if that like describe everything. You know what I mean? Yeah. So we want to include types, you know, like it does mean something to be a personality type. That is a factor. It's something, you know, but it's not everything.
Right. Well, I think so. We went over what sort of leads you to emergentism somewhat. We covered that, other minds. Is there anything else you want to mention about emergentism, or am I all right to just sort of give you my thoughts on that?
Yeah, give me your thoughts. If you want, you can jump into why you like idealism, and we can talk about some of that.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Right, okay. So I think that from my point of view, the tricky thing that I've got is that whatever our shared reality is, that there's this... when I say that it feels like something to be me, I can't attribute that causally to that shared reality. It seems very much to me like when I say that it feels like something to be me, that the only cause of that is the fact that it does feel like something to be me, and that I've managed to express that out into the world. And as soon as I've accepted that as true, as soon as I've accepted that as a package, what I find myself seeing is that my consciousness is somehow able to affect our shared reality, and that for me to be able to have this conversation with you about phenomenal consciousness, that I haven't just affected reality, but you've also picked up on the way that I've affected reality. You've identified, you've understood, you've gone, oh yeah, I'm a mind too. And you've been able to relay it back to me. So we've sort of got this communication that's gone from the mental interior to the exterior view, where it's sort of objective, back into your subjectivity. And there's this sort of like, it's bouncing between our minds in that respect. And for me, when I sort of look at that from a logical point of view, what I see is that consciousness is some sort of force or selector in reality, right? I'm making at least some things happen. And then when I try and make sense of that, given the scientific knowledge that I've sort of accrued over the years, everything that we have in terms of forces, although it doesn't necessarily have to be a force, it could be a bit more of a selector, and I can dive into that. But everything that we've got that sort of affects change is something that can usually be boiled down to something that's fundamental, right? We don't have electromagnetism kicking in, say, a billion years into the universe. Neither would we do that with gravity or the weak force or the strong force. So my simple way of looking at it is saying, well, why would we say that about the effect that consciousness has on reality?
I guess my counter argument to that would be something like look at the internet. Do we think that every microchip has a little bit of the internet in it? Going all the way down and back. It's clearly a force. It's clearly a thing that's happening in reality that is, that's real and is having a strong effect. But we don't think that it goes all the way down and back. We think that it's an emergent property of the hardware and the software. And from the perspective of, in this video right now, I'm not really even conscious of the fact that there's all of this like ones and zeros and hardware and all this kind of crazy stuff going on.
Right.
Also, if you don't mind me saying, one of the things that I think, one of the ways that I feel like I see idealists going wrong, and I think I've seen this argument with my fan from my group when I talked to him yesterday about Bernardo and this thing, and he was saying that that there's this parsimony argument or something like this, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we'll get into that a little bit too, because I'm not a fan of that. I think that's like a misuse of Occam's razor. But I think that that people, like, we start from that epistemic primary, right? That we know that there's consciousness, we know that we exist, right? But I think that, again, if you want to make ontological or cosmological claims, or if we want to know what our consciousness really is, that we have to figure that out in a context. And I feel like what I see a lot of idealists doing is being like, I know that consciousness is the epistemic primary, and I don't know that there can be other things outside of that, so therefore it must be the ontological primary. And to me, that seems like a leap in logic, where you didn't establish that it was the ontological primary. You just said, well, we can't know other things. And so then you think that you know something about consciousness without actually having demonstrated that you do know something about consciousness, right? So it's like, if I'm in this problem, I can't just assume that I even know what consciousness is until we've done work through establishing other minds and through science and through figuring things out in a context. And if idealists are saying that this exterior context that we're experiencing isn't even the outside stuff, then I don't think that I don't even think that they can epistemically, like in terms of logical moves, go from that to then making claims about the nature of reality. It seems to me, based on the type of moves that they're making, that they should be probably a solipsist and maybe an agnostic.
Okay.
I don't think that I feel like there's missing logical steps in that I haven't seen idealists make to come to their conclusion. In fact, I would say even further that I've never seen a valid logical case for idealism that I think stands. Like not even like getting to the like, oh, it's a valid idea, let's try to test it and falsify it. Like I haven't even seen idealists ever make a valid logical case that stands for idealism. Gotcha.
Well, there's rather a lot there. So I'd absolutely love to cover that with you.
Okay,
I know
word.
that my approach to working with these things is that I always like to lead with what I feel is my own understanding first and the strongest points in my own understanding. But I should at least have some capability in sort of representing the way that people are sort of thinking sort of from the Bernardo Castro camp. And I'm very happy to get into the parsimony argument. I think that sounds fantastic. So I'd like to, I suppose, just sort of come back to your point about the internet being emergent.
Sure,
because I think this is where it gets
really interesting. I did put
really
a lot on the
interesting,
table
right?
there. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's all right. I've got my notes, and that'll do me fine. Right. That's quite all right. Right. So, okay. So the internet being emergent, for me, when I look at what the internet is, we've got microchips, we've got signals. Everything is still reducing down to fundamental particles. It's all reducing down to physics that we know and understand, right? So we can say that it's quarks, gluons, and electrons, and we can say that it's the electromagnetic force, and we can go back to those fundamentals, right? And we can put them together in just the right way, and we can end up with the internet. That's what's marvelous about it. So that, philosophically speaking, to me, is weak emergence, right? It's weak emergence in the fact that whatever the phenomenon is that we're looking at, it's fundamentally reducible to its component parts. And that rings true for the internet if you don't think about the fact that humans made it. So if we just forget that, because it adds up complication to the whole thing, if we forget that just for the time being, then the internet as being emergent seems perfectly reasonable. Perfectly
technically,
reasonable. It's weakly
humans
emergent.
are part of nature, so it's fine.
I know what you're getting at, but we're invoking the consciousness thing, and we're just to try and find a neutral thing as the internet.
Okay.
Because that's why I'm sort of going with that. But no, absolutely, humans are part of nature. So the problem that I've got with consciousness being emergent is that you can't reduce that. It feels like something to be me utterance down into that physical model. So we wouldn't be talking about weak emergence like the internet. We'd be talking about strong emergence, or as Ian McGilchrist says, brute emergence. We've gone from explaining stuff from its component parts to bang, something new just came onto the universe, right? It's that whole idea in the integral theory that there's not this interior quadrant until we get to a certain point in the universe, and then it pops up, and then it starts messing around with the rest of the rest of the quadrants, right? It starts interacting. So this idea that we've got this new thing that kicks in several billion years into the universe and then starts interacting with stuff is something that I find an intractable problem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that there is kind of a problem with that, because I don't think that it's just like there's a switch and bang, it turns on, right? And I think that's one of my problems with the idea of the hard problem, is as if there should be just a time when it turns on. It's like there's no clear line between chemistry and biology. There's not like the switch where we can just be like, oh, that's when biology happened or something like that, Okay. And the difference between like, something that's like the emergence of life, let's say, like biology. Like, I watched this really good TED Talk once about, like, you know, the blurry line between life and not life, I think is what it's called. And, like, he's doing all these experiments with what he's calling proto-cells to see if he can figure out how to get life to emerge. And it's really interesting. Basically, he starts with, like, these very, very simple little chemicals and stuff like that. And you put them in these little test tubes, and, like, sometimes they have, like, a property, like this one moves around and this one, you know, swims to, you know, and then what happens is you get them in there and then they merge, and then a unique property will happen, you know what I mean? And then now this thing that just, like, would shake until the energy ran out, or, like, that would go to this, you know, now it does this new property. And so it's like when life happens, like 2 or 3 of these properties come together, and then we say, oh, now this is like the arbitrary line where we're saying something is alive. And then, you know, it's hard to say when something, like, at least based on just looking at stuff, when something like an experience of beings, what it's like to be something, would come online. It seems like you would need some conceptual tools to be able to conceive of something like that, like not just the equipment to receive information from the environment, but some kind of conceptual processing of that equipment, or that information, like, oh, this is happening to me, and there are things out there. You know what I mean? Like, so that in itself
I think so.
That in itself requires some conceptual elements, you know. So it's like maybe something like an ant or something like this. They're obviously communicating with other ants. They have, you know, some simple things, like they're laying down trails of information and things like this, and they have, like, their simple roles and stuff like this. So it's not to say that there's not probably some kind of communication, or maybe even like a basic experience of what it might be like to be an ant, even if it's not fully conscious of it. I guess my point is, like, there's a very long spectrum of something like the development of consciousness, from basically nothing up to something like us that's able to have a complicated experience. And it seems like we understand, we have data about lots of stuff in there. You know, there are probably gaps in our knowledge, there are things that we don't know about or whatever. But I feel like this hard problem, like the way that it's framed, is as if we know nothing, because we can't point to, like, an on switch or something like that. And that seems to be misrepresenting what's even being talked about in the first place, you know, as if there is an on switch. I think this is kind of what Daniel Dennett is trying to say when he talks about, you know, the what is it, the tune deck or whatever, that there, like, might be different ways of doing something, or that, like, even what we think consciousness is kind of an illusion. Or at least it's an illusion if we think about it in terms of the way that we've been indoctrinated to think about what it is to be a person or a self, right? So we have to rethink what consciousness even really is on his view, that we kind of take it for granted and just think, oh, well, I'm just this thing. You know, it's like in the same way that we take language for granted. I think that it's just describing what is.
I think if I may, with Daniel Dennett, and you know what, I'm very happy to learn from you. I know I already have with the integral stuff, right? I think that with Dennett, my understanding with Daniel Dennett, I almost tried to mash those into one word. Then with Daniel Dennett, I understand illusionism, because I think what you've said there is really important, right? I understand illusionism in philosophy of mind to be that consciousness itself isn't just an illusion, as in it's not what it seems like, because I'd agree with that, right? The whole idea that there's more to it than what we might know seems eminently reasonable to me, completely reasonable. But my understanding of illusionism in philosophy of mind is to say that this sense of subjective experience, qualia, that I'm this experiencing thing, you know, I think, therefore I am. Illusionism to me is I think, therefore I'm not. Right? So I'm not saying that there aren't things that are there to learn in that perspective, and I'm not saying that it's not a welcome challenge to the way that we should think. Although, you know, I feel differently about that depending on what day you ask me. But yeah, I think that my understanding of Daniel Dennett is that he's saying that, you know, you say that it feels like something to be you do that, but it's purely performative, right? So I have difficulty getting my head around exactly what Daniel Dennett's saying, but I welcome anyone who can steel man him for me. I really do. Heading back to what we said about sort of talking about consciousness switching on in the universe, right? And I think that if we move to more of a dimmer switch model, I don't think that necessarily solves the problem, right? At some point, if we imagine a light bulb and we've got 0 volts, absolutely nothing is going on. We're not getting any photons coming off that filament whatsoever. If at some point, when photons start to leave that because a sufficient voltage has been applied for it to start radiating photons, something's happened that hadn't been happening before. Now, you can have the potential for that, as you would with a light bulb, and we can sort of say maybe there's some proto-consciousness going on. You know, that's an interesting perspective, I suppose. But I don't think we're really getting past the problem that the universe doesn't have subjective experience, and then it does. What I do really, really agree with you on, though, is that we've clearly gone from very well, it would seem to be clear, right? It seems clear to me right now that we've gone from very, very simple, rudimentary conscious experiences in terms of bacteria or however low you're comfortable going, right? And then working that through into much richer, more complicated conscious experiences that we have now. And I think that's possibly where the confusion lies. It's between this idea that what does a conscious state feel like for an animal or a plant or a bacteria or whatever you want to go with, and the fact that there's one to be had or there isn't. And I think that there's one to be had or there isn't, which is where we get that problem binary starting to come in.
Right. Well, I think also part of the problem is like that we kind of start from pre-assumed ideas of what we think consciousness means in the first place when we have this conversation, right? So it's like, even when we're saying like, well, when does the consciousness happen? You know, it's like, if we agree upon, you know, the definition of like consciousness is something like what it feels like to be me or to have an experience or something like that, you know, that's kind of a first-person description of consciousness that we could probably agree on, but that's not necessarily a third-person description of consciousness that we would agree on, and
Right.
and also, you know, if we're talking about this dimmer switch idea, and if we're related back to this idea of, you know, what we were talking about earlier about philosophy and living a conscious life versus just post hoc justifications, one almost wonders if for most people the lights are even on yet. You know?
Okay. I felt like that. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, like, even that, the idea of like, are these people conscious or are they just the universe playing itself out in some kind of way? Well, it depends on where you draw the line, I guess.
I think what we've started to touch on here is something really interesting. It's perhaps the notion that is it possible to become aware of things and then decide that you're going to change your behavior because of that? And that sounds to me like a very sophisticated form of self-determination based on observation.
Well, it could also just be that the process has gotten so complicated that it has deconstructed its own conditioning to understand that it's conditioned in order to be able to question itself or something like that. But you would say probably that it's still the same perspective coming in through the back door of the same, like still highly conditioned. Like one doesn't really get out of the conditioning, one just gets more conditioning or more perspectives to help put the previous perspectives in a larger perspective. Yeah, one never really gets outside of perspective itself to be able to make a purely objective decision from nowhere or something like that.
I think I've tried to ponder on what objectivity might mean, and the best thing that I can think of is sort of a knowledge of all possible subjective states and how they work. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like the objective is sort of a language that we use because we're not objective creatures. It's sort of, I think it's sort of somewhat colliding with what you're saying.
I think like starting from the bottom, right? Like in terms of like something like biopsychism or something like that, maybe we would make distinctions like sentient and then sapient and then like I don't know what you would call like an enlightened being or an awakened person or something like this. Like so what I'm saying, I guess, is like there's different ideas of what it even means to be awake and to be conscious, right? So it's like maybe we would want to say that cells have consciousness or plants have consciousness or something, but that's totally different from the kind of philosophically aware and like actively like conscious kind of thing that we're talking about on this different level. So
I should think so.
Yeah. So even when we talk about what it is to be conscious, I think it can be confusing because there's so many different terms and so many different places where people draw the line. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, for me, the way that I process and understand all of this, and I really do appreciate you bringing that up, the way that I always process this is very much through the lens of, does it feel like something to be And it's not just that sort of bootstraps you up to the next level, which is, does that feeling of being like something to be a thing then start affecting the environment, right? So for me, obviously with sort of human form, it certainly is, but the idea that consciousness has a force that acts on the world only when it gets to a certain complexity, sort of a threshold model, it's not my first go-to. My first go-to would be to assume that consciousness is always affecting the world, but meta-consciousness is more of a threshold thing. But, oh gosh, it's not easy territory, is it?
No, it's really not. These are complicated conversations. You're a fan of Sam Harris, right?
Yeah, I'm a fan and a critic.
A
fan and a critic, yeah.
Well, that's good. Well, I mean, I respect that because I'm a fan and a critic too. That's actually why I was excited to see him talk with Jordan Peterson, is because I was like, hey, maybe this will help him understand the value. I mean, like, actually, that's one of the reasons why I like Sam too, is because out of all the atheists, he's one of these dudes who's actually able to not just pigeonhole all religion as bullshit, but he's able to like make distinctions about different and I'm critical of that too. Like I'm not necessarily 100% with him on his views about Islam or any of that kind of stuff too, although I think he comes from a sincere place.
Yeah.
But what do you think about what he has to say about free will? I feel like he's a very good voice for determinism.
I'm so frustrated with Sam. So I think that when it came to the evidence that he presented in Freewill, which is a book that I could run downstairs, grab and sort of run back up the stairs with, I think that he didn't represent, what's the name of the person who did the experiments? Oh man, it's not coming to me right now, but there were Libet, thank you, Benjamin Libet. There were particular experiments that he did, and he didn't introduce all of the scientific data in his book. He didn't say, well, there's this experiment that confirms what I'm suggesting to you, and there's this experiment that, detracts from what I'm suggesting as a hypothesis. He didn't do that. And I'm like, Sam, what are you doing? You know, people think that you're a scientific person, and here you are writing a book not representing all the views, right? You're picking the one that says, oh, look, I'm right, and you're running with it. And Libet didn't even think that free will was completely absent, right? So this is a guy that he's, you know, using the experiment from. And Libet had some interesting ideas about free won't.
Free won't.
Which is fascinating, right?
Never heard that before.
I feel that, there's quite a bit to it. I definitely recommend digging into it a bit. And with all of that, I think he's exceptionally good with the rhetorical stuff. Exceptionally good. He's so persuasive. But that bothers me because, you know, if I've got a lot of authority behind me and I say to you, you know, just imagine this, just picture this, just imagine this, and I shower you with a load of metaphors, you know, it's gonna set ideas off in your head, you know?
Sure.
And I think that it's possibly not the critical thinking that we really need all the way through. He's got some good points, but I think for me, the place where what he's saying falls a little flat is that, and this is the thing, right? Annika, his wife, when she did a book on consciousness, she covered this bit, and I was, oh yes, good, good.
Yeah, I read that book,
and
by
it's
the way.
what I've mentioned already.
I read that book, by the way.
Sorry. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, we were talking about doing a review on it.
Okay, all right.
I would love to see your review on this Sam Harris book. I would encourage you to make that.
I will try and do that. I have tried to write scripts on that in the past. My script writing experience for my episodes tends to be a 10-to-1 thing. So of the 10 scripts that I write, one will get made. And when one gets made, I might even do 5 revisions to that script. It gets a bit like that. It's a question that I sort of feel like you've got to try and get it right. It's nicer when you're having organic conversations because people kind of understand the context. But when I sort of step out and I go, right, I'm going to make a video where I say a thing, I get quite serious about it. So
yeah, I feel you.
Yeah, so the thing that Sam really misses out, aside from making a powerful rhetorical case and not including all of the science, not including the science that disagrees with him, is that for me, the thing that really cracks Sam Harris's perspective wide open and tells me it's wrong is that it's coming back to what I said before. It's not just the fact that it feels like something to be me. It's the fact that I can tell you about it. I can watch my subjective experience and intention of wanting to tell you about my own consciousness. I can watch it sort of unfolding in the physical world. I can even imagine it sort of going through the microphone in different forms, going through the internet, and then it reaches you, and then you get it subjectively. And to me, that's all the evidence that I need that consciousness is an active force in the world, and that's sort of what I feel that Sam is undermining. And I know that there's more sophistication to get at there. I know there's more things to explore in Sam's perspective, but I know that there's a real danger in oversimplifying his message and then going, oh gosh, I guess I'm not in control of my life then. And I think that's dangerous.
What do you think the danger is with that?
I think that if people feel like they're not able to make choices, that might make them less able to make good choices because they say, well, what's the point, right? I can't make a choice, so why beat myself up about anything? Whereas if you feel that maybe there are things that you can do, then that could be quite a positive thing. I do think it's very important, though, that I try and...
He says that he addresses that stuff in the book, though, right? About, like, you still have to live your life, and, like, even if you don't have free will necessarily, it still feels like you have free will. It still feels like I want to go to the store, like I want to go to the store, even if the reason I want to go to the store is because I'm hungry and we're out of food at the house or whatever. Like, it still seems like I want to go to the store, and like, so I don't feel like there's really that danger to where people are going to be like, oh, I don't have free will, I guess it doesn't matter what I do. I think he tries to address that point, at least in the book, right?
Okay, yeah.
Doesn't he?
I think pretty sure that for me, and this is really where my own perspective and bias sort of steps into it, for me, if someone's going to tell me, oh, by the way, this whole idea that you've got of making choices is BS, but do it anyway, I'm going to be like, that's just not logically coherent.
Well, you can't help but do it. Try
Well,
not to do
maybe.
it. How about that?
There are people who've said that in psychology experiments that people believing they have no choice really does have a harmful effect on people. And I know that I'm just bringing that up anecdotally at the moment, and I need to do a bit more research and point it out, and sort of like, that could be a whole chat in itself. But I kind of buy that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that he's
I think
incredibly
a lot
harmful.
of
There is something...
Go ahead.
Oh, there is a nugget of something that I do want to get to in what Sam's saying that I think is brilliant, though. Right?
Okay.
And which is the idea that if someone's not doing well in their life, if they're messing things up, is it reasonable to say, well, you could have made an amazing life, but it's your free will that's made, you've chosen to be a bad person. And I think that can be a destructive attitude, right? So I think that possibly what we need is more of a middle ground. Is it possible that people aren't always good at using their free will? That it's not that they decided to be bad people, it's just that they hadn't empowered themselves or learnt how to use their decision-making powers sufficiently to be better, right? So I think maybe we can have our cake and eat it a little bit if we sort of take that perspective.
Yeah, and I think that people who are going to be more, like, for example, I know my partner who's writing, my podcast partner who's writing the book on free will, like, his main concern is not so much on, like, individuals feeling, like individual morality. His stuff is more about, like, a systemic kind of concern. Like, he's coming at it from, like, a more Marxist kind of perspective and a more, like, systems theory kind of thing. Like, a lot of people who are concerned with this question of free will and determinism, what they're really thinking about is the justice system and things like this. Like, should we be, because basically, our justice system is built on this idea of there being free will. And I think what we end up doing with that is we end up basically scapegoating a bunch of individuals for the way that our system is messed up, instead of taking responsibility for the way that we're consistently, systemically creating situations that allow for messed up people to be happening. If we continue to create bad environments, then we can continue to expect that, bad results. And that's not like, there's even if you want to take a free will kind of perspective, I and maybe this is what you're talking about having our cake and eating it too. I think we still have to realize the limits of our ability to take responsibility or something like this, right?
Yep.
And so
agreed. Agreed. Being able to make choices doesn't offer you infinite power to change the world around you. So it doesn't give you infinite responsibility to make sure that you do, per se. It's a question of doing our best, isn't it? There's so many tangents and little branches here where I feel like we could have, like, big conversations all in of themselves.
Yeah.
I'm keen to make sure that we get
to hanging out with you too, man. I'm really enjoying this.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, likewise. I hope we can do this again sometime and sort of, like, pick some different topics as well.
Sure, man.
That'd be brilliant.
Yeah, I'd be down for that.
Excellent. I want to sort of think about, and sort of, because I know that we want to sort of cover the Bernardo Kastrup angle on this as well. So I guess the question is, have we defined the differences in our perspectives well enough at the moment? Because I think that there was more stuff that you mentioned about new properties and emergent stuff, but I think that I would sort of rebut that by saying that if we are talking about new properties, there was an interesting thing where I was reading the comments section to a particular video of Genetically Modified Skeptic, and it was a fairly recent video, and there was a channel trying to talk about how you can't get red if there's no red that's already in the picture, right? It was something loosely like that, and I think the comment that I saw was something like, you can get new properties from chemicals in chemical reactions, so it is possible to get new things where they didn't exist before. And I don't think that's true at all, right? So if I think about how I understand chemistry, and it sort of goes back to what you were saying about the blurry line, right? I'm not expecting anything in chemistry to be made up of anything other than essentially sort of like quarks, gluons, and electrons, right? I feel like that should all just reduce down. That is the sort of like the standard scientific sort of materialistic paradigm to look at stuff through, or even just the standard scientific paradigm, right? We don't have to presuppose that everything is just fundamentally made of matter. You know, we could be physicalists, for example, and that's a bit different. You know, it's a subtle difference, but it's important, I think. But any of these new properties are all just different ways that things behave that we could deduce from the components. It's all weak emergence still, right? So I see a lot of people who say, but emergence is a real thing, and then they point to weak emergence, and we go, well, yeah, I mean, weak emergence, we're all for weak emergence. I've got no problem with weak emergence. But when we're talking about consciousness and this subjectivity, we're really talking about strong emergence or brute emergence. We're talking about this thing coming on. And I know I totally accept your point, right, about this whole idea that, you know, it's not like if we think of consciousness as human consciousness, then clearly that didn't just get switched on like a light bulb. We're talking about complexity and emergence from a much simpler conscious experience. I'm sort of not thinking in an idealistic way to have this conversation, otherwise it would get a lot more complicated.
Right, but and some of the components are not just reducible to hardware too. There's like software components too, or like conceptual components, especially to create something like consciousness, right? Because if you're going to have an experience of something out there, like you have to be able to interpret that and say that it's and feel like it's happening to you. So it's not just like it's just a matter of stuff. There's also a relational and meaning interpretive kind of component to it. And so like I think that's part of the problem is like when people talk about it like this, they talk about like it should be reducible to stuff, and it's like, well, I think that it's not, because we're leaving out, this whole conceptual interpretive framework, which actually allows for the experience too.
I would say to that I know what you're guessing at, but to me the software is just patterns that run in the hardware. It's not like an ethereal separate something. It's just a particular pattern that exists and works within the hardware, right? There's if I have a computer software program, it's just a pattern that exists on the memory stick. It's not something that you can separate out from the hardware. You know, it has to be in some sort of manifest form, otherwise it doesn't exist.
Right.
And I think that for me, that we can talk about all the patterns that could exist in those sort of quarks and gluons and electrons and all those fundamental particles. And we should, in principle, if we're eliminative materialists, if we don't believe that consciousness is a thing, be able to build the entire world out of these material parts. And for me, I've tried to take that view seriously, but as soon as you bump up against this subjective force that's able to influence things, whoo, it changes the game for me. It really does. And I want to be open to thinking differently about it, but I've just not heard any compelling arguments to change my mind. So we can talk about things going from simple consciousness to complex consciousness, just as Kurzgesagt do, right? And that's fine. But we've still got that really awkward problem. The really awkward problem is, and this is how I see the hard problem, right? It's when do you go from a system that's just behaving to a system that's also feeling? When do you switch, even if it's the simplest of feelings, the dumbest of sentient systems, right? The absolute dumbest you could imagine consciousness could be. Maybe just one feeling and one stimuli and one possible response. It doesn't really matter. Because at some point, you've still got to have a force that you have to explain in the universe. And, the way that we do that is by building out of fundamentals. But we don't seem to want to do that with consciousness because, I think there's resistance to it for a whole bunch of reasons. I could make a show about that. But I've said a lot.
it kind of reminds me of irreducible complexity. Do you remember? Have you ever heard that argument from like creationists?
I'm not brilliant at it, but it's faintly ringing some bells. So if you want to give me a little bit of a talk about what it means, and I think that'll also help the audience as well.
That like things can only get so uncomplicated before they're just like you have something that doesn't work. You know, like you just have like parts. So it's like I don't know. I guess like I feel like I'm hearing something parallel to that. I guess it's like you wonder at what point at which something actually feels and has an experience. Like there gets to be like, where is that line, and like what actually is required for it?
Well, it seems so unlikely to me that there is a line, because the line seems to be flying against everything that we know in physics, that I go, well, sod the line, let's get rid of the line. And that breaks into consciousness or some aspect of feeling being fundamental. So it's kind of funny, because I watched sort of the Ken Wilber stuff, and I was kind of resonating with that sense of that I amness, right? And it sort of, it goes in that direction. And, you know, I've said before, and I think it is really important. You know, I am quite partial to, I do quite prefer idealism, but I really want to make sure that I steel man and take really seriously all the other possibilities. I really want to think about them.
I respect that, man. I definitely can tell that you're honest, and that you're acting in good faith here, and that you really you care about what's true, and you want to figure out what's going on. There's no problem. Like, I mean, like when I first came across Ken Wilber, I would say that I was probably swinging more to the idealist side too. You know, I'd taken psychedelics, and I feel like, you know, my concept of what reality was had been kind of blown open, and I was definitely thinking that there was a lot of different possibilities, and so. You know, and I think that there's a lot of confusing language around the stuff too. You know, like, and a lot of the way that people talk about stuff could actually be cashed out in the light of multiple different worldviews. You know, like the people talk about like the drop being a drop in the ocean, or, you know, like, so there's a lot of vague poetry going on out there, and it's not really clear how a lot of it cashes out. And there's, I think, in general, just a lot of confusion around, like in the postmodern community, about what cosmology is, what ontology is, what epistemology is. People a lot of times don't have these tools, and they don't know how to have these conversations, and they haven't really sat down and thought about it rigorously. And so I appreciate the effort and the hard work that you're putting in here to really try to figure out what's going on. I think, you know, you're going above and beyond, especially compared to what most people do. And so big respect to you for that, man. At the end of the day, I think that we have to really look for that, and like at least give people, you know, the base level of respect for that approach, regardless of whether they're right or wrong, or we agree with them or not about certain things. What matters is if we're trying to figure it out in an honest and open kind of way. Because there's a lot of people out here who are talking about this stuff, and they are not talking about it in an honest or open kind of way, where it seems like they're really trying to figure it out. And so, you know, that's a big thing to me. Like, I really respect and appreciate people who you can tell that they just want to know. Like, they just care. They just want to, you know, be in line with truth. And so that's what's up. I think that's, to me, like, you know, that's a real philosopher right there. So big respect. Now, that being said, you're wrong. No.
That's better. It's good.
I'm just playing.
Well, if we feel that we've got some useful back and forth on how I'm wrong and what makes me wrong, I'm all up for hearing that. But I know that we really do want to at least tackle some of the Bernardo Kastrup stuff, rather than perhaps just exactly the way that I think about it. So maybe a couple of minutes, or longer if you want, right? As long as you want, to sort of bounce back why I might be wrong. And then after that, Bernardo Kastrup stuff, right? Does that sound good?
Sure.
So what is it that you think... So what where do you think I'm making a mistake in my thinking? In what I've sort of explained so far about, well, I don't, the line doesn't make sense, so why have a line?
Well, I mean, I think that we can pretty clearly correlate functions to equipment, and we can say that certain things allow for other things to happen, right? In the same way, like, and I think this is true too, even if we have gaps in our knowledge, right? Like, I don't have to know everything about how a computer works to know that you can't pull up Facebook on the air. You need to have some kind of device that allows for Facebook to be displayed, or what, for it to work or something like that, right?
Sure.
So it seems to me like pretty clear that when we look at like the really simple things or something like this, that they don't seem to have an experience, and they don't seem to have the equipment that would allow for such an experience. And it seems to me also that as we look at things becoming more complicated, that we can see that with the development of particular equipment, certain functions become possible. And that through, so for example, the different levels of the brain allow for particular functions that correlate with those levels of the brain. And if you take those things away, you don't get those things. So I think, so for something like the experience of what it is to be me, to even be a possible thing, not only do you need to have the equipment to be able to process that kind of concept, but you have to have concepts to be able to put that together, to be able to have that experience. Like, if you I think like, for example,
well, you have to have concepts to relate it to someone else, for sure. I'm not sure how much you need concepts. I mean, you have to have concepts to understand it in a self-reflective way too. But I think that it would be possible to just have a raw being without there being a particular.
I mean, I think you could have a raw
concept.
experience, but like, you're not going to be able to interpret or make any sense of it, right? So it would just like,
Right.
so it's like, I like this rapper. His name is KRS-One, stands for Knowledge Reigns Supreme Over Nearly Everyone. He's a philosophy rapper. He says, you don't see with your eyes, you see with your brain. I'm going to say mind. I'm going to correct him. You see with your mind.
Right.
And the more ideas and concepts that you have, the more you can see, right? And so he says, like, if you come into a room, for example, and you're an electrician, you're going to see more things in that room than a regular person would, because you are trained to see particular things, right? So it's like, if you have more ideas, that allows for you to interpret reality. In this debate that I recently had with these two integral professors, one of them was talking about his experience of like sitting in front of the ocean, and how he can't communicate everything that he's experiencing because it's such a profound experience. And I'm like, okay, maybe you can't communicate it, but there's also tons of things that you're not seeing because you're not a surfer, you're not like a historian, or you're not like, it's like, so you don't know actually everything that you're looking at. Your experience is limited to your own limited perspective. And I think that it's like that all the way down and back to, up until the point to where you don't even have the equipment to be able to necessarily process that stuff. Like, I think a little cell or something like this, they don't have a concept of self. They don't probably have a concept of what it's like to be them. They might. I don't. It's hard for me to say what a cell's experience would be like, and it's hard not to get into anthropomorphism or something like that on the other side too, right? Where it's like, I start assuming that like my experience is the same as a cell or something like that, or like, but yeah, it doesn't seem like less complicated things are alive or have consciousness, and it certainly seems like it's equipment and hardware and software, if you don't mind me using those metaphors, that really allow for this thing to be possible. I don't really see you saying how or why you would think that it would go all the way down, or like what would be evidence that it exists at these lower levels, in terms of like that would lead, or like, you know, things that would like lead us to conclusions that would make us think. Because I think like just looking at the deductive reasoning of it, even if we can't know what the experiences of cells or these lower level things are like, it would certainly seem like that at a certain point things are not alive and they're not conscious, and there's not a good reason to think that they are, right?
Well, okay, yeah. Well, I think we've got a real problem here, and I think you've really hit a nail on the head here, like majorly, when you say, when do things seem conscious? That's brilliant. I think that, look, honestly, what I'd really love to do with this, right? Because you know what? I'm a slow thinker, right? I don't have like quick genius moments or anything like that. What I do is I go and I process and I chew stuff over, and maybe 2 weeks later I'm like, aha, you know, I've got something. So, you know, I also want to totally agree with you on something as well, which is that it's this, it's not just you trying to figure something out against the world. It's you trying to cooperate with the world to figure stuff out. It's brilliant. Do you know what I mean? I know that you hit upon that sentiment before, and I just want to say, yes, absolutely. So I think the fault line, right, in our perspectives, the fault line is, when do things seem conscious? And that's brilliant, right? So I don't even think, if you look at someone like Daniel Dennett, if you look at Illusionism, I don't think we've even convinced everyone that people are conscious. And if you can't convince everyone that people are conscious, what the hell hope do you have of understanding what consciousness is and how far down it goes? And to me, the thing that really sways me, and I think that this is probably the point where we should probably just leave it for this session, unless you want to say anything in response, and you're more than welcome to do so, of course, is that it's really, for me, it's the inner physicist that just goes, ah, no, everything has to be reducible to fundamentals. It just does. That's how we do physics. That's how we make sense of the world. So if my consciousness is doing things, if it's active, logically that's obvious to me because I can talk to other people about it, then it has to go all the way down. It just has to. So I sort of see it from a point of view of embracing the whole like continuum of complexity and emergence, but in the context of saying that there's always been this I amness. I'm Ken Wilbering you, right? I'm sort of like saying there's always been this thing from which had this potential to develop into what it is today. And that's possibly a good place. Obviously, I want to give you some time to respond to that, but that's possibly a good place to start going down the Bernardo Kastrup route. So, parsimony. Yeah, parsimony. I know, yeah, this is a good one. So, I feel
like this
his
argument?
parsimony argument.
The parsimony one? How do you feel about it?
I like it. I think it makes sense to me. I didn't. Okay. This is you know, there's another area, right? There are areas of Bernardo's work where I'm a bit more like, you know, there's. I feel that's an interesting and a point to talk about as well. But let's concentrate on what I'm happy with. So I think the parsimony stuff I'm very happy with, right? So for me, the version that I've got internalized of the parsimony stuff is something like this. It goes, well, it feels like something to be me, and my outward appearance to other people, and sort of like is that I am represented as matter, right? So there's this mind behind the matter that is me. So if I want to be parsimonious about that, I assume that everything that I'm interacting with that looks like matter has a mind behind it. And that checks out okay to me. I'm quite happy with that. So where do you have your objection to it?
So, like, a table or a cup has a mind?
It would have, in some fashion, but we don't have to say that table, it has an individual mind, right? In the same way that a neuron in your brain that made up your conscious experience, it doesn't have to have a mind in of itself behind it, right? So we're just taking the idea that everything is made of mind, as your, sort of classical idealist thing goes, and that perhaps there's a mind behind the whole of the cosmos from which life is a dissociated mind, right? So when I look at the table, it's part of there's a mind behind it, but not behind the individual table, behind the whole of the physical, the world that the table is constituted of.
Okay. I feel like this parsimony argument... Okay, the way that the dude who I talked to was talking about it, it seems like it's the wrong tool for the job. And the way that he was presenting it was like, all things being equal, this is part of the first premise, which, I mean, already I'm already disagreeing, because I don't think that that these theories are different, are on equally valid footing, right? But let's say all things being equal, that if theory A is simpler than theory B, then we should favor theory A, something like this. And like this is parsimony is like related to Occam's razor too. Like parsimony is about usually like an economy of language, and it's like the way that it's usually used as is like, all things being equal, if you have two ideas that are basically saying the same thing, then you would pick the version of it that is the least complicated wording of the thing to be able to say it, right? So it's like, if you can use a simpler explanation, that you go with that. So that seems valid to me, but I don't think that that's what we're doing here. I think that in the context of evaluating worldviews, the way to do that is, it's not just the simplest worldview wins. It has to have explanatory power in terms of being able to deal with all the factors at play, and it has to have at least a logically sound argument in favor of it, and preferably it would be nice if we had evidence to support it as well. So what I kind of feel like Bernardo is doing is like some kind of tricky chess move here, where he's bringing in a new standard of justification, where he's like basically doing like a trick to where he can be like, the simplest argument wins, which is generally not how it would work in any other context. Like, for example, if like your friend thinks his girlfriend is cheating on him, he's not going to be like, well, the easiest answer is just to think that she was home and she never left and nothing happened. Now, he's going to want the answer that best accounts for all the data that are facts on the table, right? So I feel like this is like a tricky thing, not only in terms of like bringing in this standard that isn't appropriate to be able to figure out what the best theory is, but also it's tricky in that if you actually strictly apply the parsimony argument, you should be a solipsist and an agnostic. You should be like, all I can know is my experience and nothing beyond that. You don't even, like, as far as I'm concerned, epistemically, then get to make claims about what the nature of reality is or what the nature of consciousness is. Like, you have to use logic and rationality to make those kinds of claims and be able to know things about a context.
In a certain sense, I feel that idealism is... I'm just going to say this. In my own mind, it seems not entirely dissimilar from solipsism. It's just that it's sort of like it almost seems
not
like
on
a
Bernardo's
development of them.
view,
I mean,
at
in
least.
solipsism...
There's one mind, and we're all part of it on Bernardo's view, right? So it's like it is kind of solipsistic.
Right. But that mind isn't just possessed by the universe as such, because I'm just an integral part of that. It's kind of mine, right? It's sort of like solipsism, but where everybody's subjective point of view is valid and real, and it's also your point of view. You just haven't figured that out yet.
Right. And another problem with that is that you don't like. You wouldn't get to come to that conclusion either. Like, you wouldn't be able to come to a particular view of idealism from this perspective to where you were able to say that that we know that all of these other people are just part of mind at large or something like that. You don't get to go from parsimony to even I would say even acknowledging that there are other minds. That's not as parsimonious. You should not do that on that principle. It would be better to think that it's just you. So I mean, like,
right. So
yeah, it seems like it doesn't actually get us to where we want to go.
I don't feel like Bernardo at any point uses parsimony like that. I think that he does embrace the values which you're sort of upholding.
And I'm getting it from this other guy, so I'm not from Bernardo directly. So, there might be a change in there.
Sure. Well, I think there are two books that I'd recommend if you've got... I mean, I know that you're a very busy guy. But I feel that this tension between emergentism and some aspect of consciousness being fundamental is perhaps one of the most interesting challenges, or one of the most interesting intellectual battlegrounds. I don't know exactly how to phrase it right now, but it's something really... There's something really good there, right? There's something really interesting, really engaging. And I feel that Bernardo's, in his work... So the idea of the world is constituted of peer-reviewed papers sewn together into a book. I think it's brilliant. And I think also Materialism is Baloney. That's a really interesting one. Those are my two personal favourites of Bernardo's work.
I think Materialism is Baloney as a book is a good example also of how I think these guys are creating this false dichotomy and trying to, instead of make a case for their worldview, try and create this sort of like, well, we poked holes in this view, so ours is the natural. It's like the more you have these kind of arguments, the more you sort of see the patterns reemerging over and over again to, like where it's like, okay, that move, all right. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you're getting at, but I do think there's some validity in the notion that people won't necessarily accept a new idea if they're already tightly holding on to one in particular. Sometimes you have to knock a bit of what's in their glass over so that you can put a bit more stuff in their glass. So I think that
I don't mind that as long as they also make a valid case for their view.
Absolutely. So the way that Bernardo frames materialism, I'd love to see if you agree with this, actually. So he's taken it into four premises, and it's literally the only thing that I thought to myself, I should probably, because it was just such a great point, I should probably just make sure that I've got it on a screen ready to read. It's the only thing, right? And it's things that need to be true for materialism to be true. I'd love to see if you agree with this.
Okay.
So he says, number one, your conscious perceptions exist. Number two, the conscious perceptions of other living entities, different from your own, also exist.
Mm-hmm.
He says, number three, there are things that exist independently of and outside conscious perception. That's number three. And then with number four, we say... I'll just read... It only goes up to number four, so I'll just quickly read this out. Things that exist independently of and outside conscious perception generate conscious perception. That's it.
Yeah. And I think that mirrors pretty well what I was saying earlier about the different steps. I exist, other people exist, we're able to do science, and we, through our theories come to this conclusion that consciousness is emergent. Yeah, so I would agree with all those. Were you ever sympathetic to materialism?
Well, okay, let's define our terms really carefully here. So when it comes to the reality of things being material, I love that. I run with that. Because like I said to you, right? It's sort of like the physicist in me doesn't like the idea of a force that comes into existence partway through the universe, right? And I'm not like a professional physicist or anything. I did to A level. I didn't do it at university, but I love the subject. And yeah, I mean that doesn't make sense from a physical lens. So it's the key things that I find is that when I look for the dictionary definitions of materialism or the dictionary definition of physicalism, we're really presupposing that the only thing that really exists is matter and what it does. Or for physicalism, you're really presupposing that the only thing that really exists is the physical world expressed in physical laws, and that's that. And that's good, though, because I think that materialism, I know it's a useful proxy, and there's a certain amount of approximation. But
this
I think
is what I was saying earlier about why
quantum
integralists don't want to identify as materialists, because of the
Right.
reductionism. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, though, my hope is that with seeing consciousness as a selector or a force that's integral to the way that the universe works, that even through a reductionist lens, that we can still account for everything. That's the way that it's that kind of like, how do I make a theory of everything out of this? And it sort of feels to me like it doesn't make sense without consciousness doing stuff.
Yeah. And I feel like maybe that's where arguing with me is different than arguing with other people who might be more materialists, is because as an integralist, I'm not going to be happy with what we would call like an exterior quadrant reductionist description of reality. Like, I don't think that we can describe the interiors in a way that's reduced to the exteriors, even if just like I don't think that like software language or like the experience of a video can be reduced to the hardware of the computer that it's played on. Even if like there's a way in which it maybe could break down and be, like, obviously the computer is a machine. It is doing something. It's like, and that's what I was saying. I was like learning about how computers work a little bit. Like each one of those chips processes ones and zeros. So it does kind of all come down to like a simple mechanical kind of process in the end. But like we wouldn't recognize that simple mechanical process as the video playing or something like that, unless we also had all those other levels on which to be able to experience it as such, right? So
Yep. No, I know exactly what you're getting at. What I would say, though, is the software is reducible to the hardware, right? We can do that. That does work.
We can do it in a like map to territory kind of sense. Like we can like use it as a as a type of descriptor, or like as the thing that let's say the code that allows for the thing to happen. But you wouldn't say that the experience of the movie or something like that is reducible to the ones and the zeros, even if practically, technically, mechanically it is. We would. It's phenomenally different or something like that.
When we enter the realm of consciousness, and conscious experience, I'm much more inclined to throw reductionism out the door. When it comes to the world, when it comes to understanding things from that exterior quadrant, reductionism always works for me. I love it. It always seems to work for me. But I suppose I'm saying I agree with you in one quadrant, but I shift to another quadrant and I disagree with you, right? But I believe both those quadrants are valid at the same time, right? So there's a bit of an interesting thing going on there.
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff is.
I would like.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say a lot of the stuff is confusing too, because like a lot of it is descriptions at like almost different fractal scales of reality, right? And it's like we want to be able to talk about how reality on a large scale is working, but also talk about how it's working on our level, and like also this like tiny biological like chemical kind of level. And it's like we have different ways of describing things at all of those levels, and they're not necessarily compatible with each other. Like it makes sense on one hand to talk about what the universe is doing and how it might be doing that through me and how I'm a part of that process. But then, on a very like everyday kind of practical scale, it's like, well, I chose to do this because I wanted to, and something like that. And it's like, so I think even just the language around a lot of this stuff makes it really, really hard for us to be able to establish anything, because it's all so convoluted and confusing, and we don't really always have all the categories at play to be able to talk about what's happening at all these levels in relation to each other at once. It's fucking complicated stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Where do we leave the book, right?
Where can we close
if
from
we
here?
wanted to say what we'd figured out together, where do we leave the book open saying, this is a really interesting area and it seems to be the point of our disagreement? And to me, I think that it really is, when do things seem conscious, right? Because that to me feels like the place where you're saying, well, that doesn't seem like it's conscious, but that seems like it's conscious, so I'm going to draw a line here. And to me, I see it in a different way. I see it in a way that says, because this consciousness stuff is doing something, I'm just going to have to put it as a fundamental aspect of things. But I account for what you're seeing by saying that things just progressively get more and more and more alien to what I can possibly imagine, what I can possibly put myself in the shoes of, until I just can't comprehend it anymore. And so I'm still sort of fairly happy as an idealist, or even just a panpsychist, right? Maybe I don't have to be an idealist. Maybe it's some sort of panpsychism instead. But it seems like the central point of where we're disagreeing here is, when do things seem conscious? Your thoughts?
Yeah. So in terms of, I think this is definitely a major area of disagreement, and I like the way of framing it in this kind of way. I guess my general sort of thoughts on that are, like, in terms of epistemology, like, we would want to look in the correct quadrant for data. This is part of how integral theory works, right? Is like, if you, like, the best kind of data that we could get is one relevant to the quadrant that we're looking in. So, for example, if I want to know what's going on with you, if I want to know what your feelings are, right? The best way I could know that is just to ask you and for you to tell me and for you to give me your phenomenological report, right? But there are other ways that I could know, right? Like, so if I have I have some knowledge about correlation between different feelings and different, let's say, behaviors and body language and things like that, or like what's capable for you, then I can do like cross-quadrant validation, let's say, right? So if you say, like, and this is probably something a lot of guys need to do, you know, if their lady's like, I'm fine.
Cross-quadrant validation.
We need to work on this cross-quadrant validation. Okay, she says she's fine. She doesn't seem fine, though. So it's like, you know, even if we can't get at the first-person data of what it feels like to be these lower-level things or whatever, we can do some cross-quadrant validation, and we can be like, well, it doesn't seem like that they're able to do any of this stuff. Or like, it seems like now that they have this equipment, that now they're able to do this and this and this. Or we see now that, like, this allows for this. And so I think that even though we can't know for sure, that we can do some pretty good deductive reasoning on this thing and come to some conclusions about. And I'm sure that you would probably agree with a lot of those conclusions too, about like what kind of hardware allows for like what kind of capacities and stuff like that. So I guess I would wonder if we could like we like ran it down and back, like, and I got you to agree, okay, well, it seems like this allows for this and this allows for this and this, like, at what point, and then I could be like, okay, like, here's a cell, okay, here's just some stuff and it doesn't seem to be doing anything. Why would we think that this has consciousness? You know, something like this. Like, I feel like if I was good enough at doing this, and if I was like a scientist and I knew enough to be able to actually, make a good case for this kind of stuff. I'm an artist and a philosopher, so I'm not really like that good with the scientific knowledge and stuff like that. But I feel like I could get you to agree with the logic of a lot of this kind of stuff. I would be interested
Yeah,
to know...
I'm sure there's a lot of places where you could. No, really.
Yeah. I'd be interested to know where we really disagree around that. You know what I mean? Like, at what point are we going to say, no, I think that even though this thing isn't acting as though it has consciousness, that maybe it still does, and why?
So, I think that, just to give you a very, very quick, just a super quick answer to that, because it would be that in the idealist model, in the way that I prefer, you've got a dissociative problem. So at some point, you've got the mind of the cosmos and something, and this is the really interesting bit. This is a bit where I could start agreeing with some of the things where it doesn't quite feel right with some of the things that Bernardo's saying, but on the whole, I completely agree with him. And that would be this whole idea that we've got this giant cosmic mind, and something starts that dissociation off. And as soon as you've got a dissociated mind, a tiny little bit of mind, it can have the simplest, tiniest conscious experiences, and those then become the building blocks of life as we know it. And that's the narrative and the way that I see all of that. But happy to be challenged, and I'll tell you what, this has been the best, most productive conversation I've had with someone who's disagreed with me since I've started my YouTube channel. And I can't thank you enough for that.
Well, big respect, man. I appreciate you saying that.
I will continue to look at stuff on your channel, right? I find the integral stuff really interesting, and it's given me a direction that I'd just not been open to before. I'm left staring at this piece of paper that just says, when do things seem conscious? And I think that's just a lovely place to end it.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a real joy.
Now's the time where I'd really like to hear from you. How did you think that went? Did you find David's argument persuasive? Do you have any critiques for David's argument? Did you find my argument persuasive? Did you have any critiques for my side of the argument? I'd like to ask you 4 questions, and I'd love to hear your responses to them in the comments section. Though please share your evidence and reasoning where you can. I'm not saying that I don't appreciate people saying, well, I feel like it's this way or I think it's that way, but it's really much more useful to me if you've got an argument to support what you believe. Okay, well, let's get on with it. Question 1. David asked for scientific evidence and falsifiability, if possible, for the hypothesis of consciousness being fundamental. My question to you is this. Do you think that the emergence of consciousness as a hypothesis has met these criteria for acceptance? Question 2. Do you think it's reasonable for consciousness to pop into existence in a cosmos that has lacked it for billions of years, and then for that consciousness to start monkeying around with the laws of physics? Number 3. Would you agree with me that the emergence of phenomenological consciousness looks credible to people because they lack an understanding of the difference between weak emergence and strong emergence? Because I feel that that's probably where things went a little bit wrong with David. Question 4. Do you accept David's argument that evolution implies the emergence of it feeling like something to be a thing? And if you do, why? Please help me understand that one. I think we'll leave it there. So I'd like to say that I hope you liked this video. And thank you for watching, and be well.
Most people think consciousness is supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
We all have our own inner movie.
Consciousness is an amazing collection of sort of mundane tricks in the brain.
If nature is made of nothing but unconscious matter, how come we're conscious?
Consciousness is irreducibly subjective. Now that sense of being a subject, a locus of consciousness inside the head, is an illusion.